go over. We had a good study last week. It was very beneficial. We started talking about the Olivet Discourse, where Jesus gave us lots and lots of information about end time events. And we just covered a lot of ground. We got up to verse 15 in chapter 24 of Matthew. Let's try this again. We got up to verse 15, I think it is, in Matthew chapter 24. And we started there about in verse 23, or chapter 23, about the end of the chapter there, those last few verses, and talked about a few other things leading up to that. So we won't do a whole lot of recap. We would just encourage you to go back and watch the last week's video. There's a lot of good information there, and that'll bring us up to speed for this one. But before we get started on that, a couple things we want to take care of real quick. First thing is, we just want you to know that we would consider it an absolute honor to have you come and visit us at the West Side Church of Christ. Our address is 2675 Kentucky Avenue. That's in Indianapolis, Indiana. The zip code is 46221. And you'll find the best group of Christians that you could ever hope to come across. People who love the truth and are dedicated to understanding that first century gospel as they understood it in the first century. And our only aim and our only goal is to help people see the truth, to be clothed in Jesus Christ, and to make it to heaven. That's the whole purpose of the New Testament church, and that's what the Church of Christ is at 2675 Kentucky Avenue in Indianapolis. So we would love to have you come and be with us. Then you'll find just the salt of the earth group of people, and they are all followers of Jesus Christ. Now, having said that, I also want to take just a moment to maybe address a thing or two. So I'm not going to dwell on this a whole lot, but I want to make a point about a local preacher here who has made it his mission in life to be essentially kind of an Alexander the Coppersmith when it comes to spreading the gospel for us. I don't even know what to say about it, other than he is constantly debating or wanting to debate, and he's this guy. If you listen to his videos, he does nothing but twist a person's words and put words in their mouth. That's not an honorable man. That's not someone who is acting in a Christian manner. If there was an honest, sincere Christian man, preacher, elder, something like that, in the Church of Christ here in Central Indiana, I've got a topic that I would love to discuss in front of the brotherhood. Did Jesus say, and his apostles and the prophets say, that he was coming back in the lifetime of the people that he spoke to? Hey, that'd be a great topic, wouldn't it? So we're looking for that, and we can certainly accommodate that and do that, and would love to have this kind of discussion. It's not a debate. This is a scriptural, biblical discussion among two honorable Christians. So that's what we're suggesting, but not with someone whose only intent is to defame and destroy and whatever else, the other things. You could probably throw a few things there too, I imagine. I'm pretty good at assessing the situation.
The only idea of a debate is basically, if you've never seen a debate, you're given a certain amount of time to preach your subject, whatever it is, and then the other person is given a certain amount of time to respond to that. Well, what happens in a debate like this, especially on this subject, is that the one who is negating the truth in the gospel will shotgun about 40 or 50 different items, knowing that the other person cannot address each of these items in a debate in the given period of time. So they just throw myriads of scripture out of context, and then the person doesn't have time to respond to them all. Plus, it moves too quickly. You don't get a chance to absorb the information that's being given. And to me, it does nothing as far as edifying the brotherhood. It's a tactical to warfare type thing. I think it's about tactics and not about information and depth. It's about how you plan and strategize for a war, and it doesn't provide any good benefit to me. Plus, the guy who wants to do this debate I've noticed with him through the years, all through the years, he will only debate if you do debate his propositions. He'll only debate if you debate where he wants to debate, when he wants to debate, and then he sets all the guidelines and parameters of that debate, and basically then he spends the rest of his time just shotgunning this subject, and it just doesn't do any good. It's not an honorable way to do it. Let's sit down and study. If you say that you have to debate because it's been taught publicly, well, then discuss it publicly, come out, give you 30, 40 minutes in our congregation, let you speak, then you can take 30 or 40 minutes of questions. That's about the best. That's much, much better than a debate. When you in a debate, you're hiding behind a bunch of information you're throwing out there that not everybody out there can absorb. And plus, you know, because you're in the majority, that you've won that debate without the truth. You can go up and say all kinds of things, and because people don't want to believe this, they're going to believe you anyway. Am I right or wrong?
Yeah, you got it for sure. Well, so not to spend a whole lot of time on this, but I have a feeling that this preacher here in town has never in his life called a debate a Bible study until me. So I've changed his perspective on a few things. So
well, he's made a practice of going out and debating on this subject, and so he's pretty adept at putting off a good show, but there's no depth to what he's trying to show the public, but he knows he has a public on his side.
You know, I went to a debate that he had, I think I was about 19 years old. My wife and I went. She was actually, I think had you become a Christian at the time, or maybe you were just a new Christian? She's off camera over here. She won't get on camera. But so she was converted from being a Baptist to becoming just the first century Christian. So we went to this debate because he was debating a Baptist. Whew, I tell you what, this was a bad situation, because Trent, he did everything he could to just rip this man apart. He essentially just called him names. I walked out of there.
Character assassination. Yeah, that's all it's about.
It wasn't about. Uh-oh, we're losing our feed here. Well, we'll just keep going as good as we can. Anyway, it wasn't about discovering the truth. Well, in his mind, of course, he's going to say that, but he said, well, you were just ashamed of the truth. I'm not ashamed of the truth, but I was ashamed of him when he did that. That was not Bible study by any means, and it certainly wasn't a way to convert a man from his error.
Well, here's an idea.
Or anybody.
Debate Matthew 24. Just put that on there. Debate Matthew 24. You affirm that this was a coming of the Lord. He denies it's a coming of the Lord. Why go to all these different specific things that you just, I don't know. Like the word final resurrection, never, I mean, he wants to debate, is this a final resurrection? Never even heard of that.
Yeah. Well, we probably
it's just a slide of words trying to trick someone into a corner. And it's like I said, it's all about tactics. It's not about the Bible. It's about character assassination. I don't know. We've spent way too much time on this. I mean,
it's not. It's it and he.
Do not throw your pearls before swine. That's what it comes down to.
You're right. Yeah. Amen. So his soul is worth it. You know, our congregation is praying for him and for his friend that does the show with him, and I pray for his friend a lot. I see a good man there, but this preacher, if he could just get straightened out, imagine what kind of good he could do for the kingdom rather than destroying people. What kind of good he can do. So we'll just leave it at that, I guess. As far as I'm concerned, unless you got a closing comment with it.
Well, and he was on a discussion with Tim, and he said that if the judgment came in 70 AD, then what happens to us? What's the end game to this? What's appointed unto man wants to die? After this, the judgment. You're judged then after you die. I mean, how simple can it be?
Yeah,
it's pretty simple. You try to convolute it and muddy the waters and then add things in there that we don't believe, and to make your point, to try to make it look ridiculous, instead, let's just sit down and study Matthew 24, debate Matthew 24.
Yeah. Well, I like my topic. I'm going to this will be an official offer to any honorable Christian man in the central Indiana area. Let's have a public discussion on the topic of, did Jesus, the apostles, and the prophets indicate the time the Lord would return to be the lifetime of the people that Jesus was speaking to? So speaking of that phrase is found in Matthew chapter 24.
Debating is just, it's not the way to go through this.
Yeah, we can have a civil discussion.
So brainwashed against it that all you have to do is say, no, 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 and they're going to believe you. Christ could stand before them, and they'd still believe you because you brainwashed them so much. Yeah. And then if the ones that you couldn't brainwash, then you condemn them publicly, or you bully them into submission or being quiet or disappearing. I don't know. It's just ridiculous to me.
Gets fired up, doesn't it?
Well, it's just ridiculous. It's just absolutely ridiculous the way that, that a man in his 60s acting and constantly out there looking for a debate, can't sit down and study with somebody.
The best way to combat his lies and deception and deceit is first of all, we expect lying, cheating, and hypocrisy. Anyway, the best way to combat that, you want to know how that is? Just teach the truth. So that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna shake this off. It's like Taylor Swift. We're gonna shake it off. Shake it off. Shake it off, Trent. Okay, that's good. All right. So let's focus on our study from last week, because we just had some great stuff going on last week, and so let's just jump right into this. If you recall from where we left off last time, we had got there to about verse 15 or so, where Jesus said, if you want to understand about this abomination of desolation, then go back and read Daniel. Now, here's a couple things I'd like to point out about this. There would be some who would say, well, all he was saying was go back and read just that part about the abomination of desolation. See, that's really disingenuous to do that, because he actually makes mention of some other things that were written in Daniel 2. Or not Daniel chapter 2, but Daniel also. So we see that taking place here. So this is not limited to just going back and looking at the 3 times that this abomination is, or this desolation is mentioned in the book of Daniel. So what we need to do is let's go back over to Daniel. So we've come up to this point where Jesus said all these things are going to take place. Let's go back and read and see what this is. So let's turn our attention first to Daniel chapter 9. Now here is a reference to this term desolation. Now think about what a desolation is, and so Daniel chapter 9, this is verse 26. Now I use the New American Standard Bible, if you haven't caught that by now. So sometimes it does read a little different. We try to catch the correct and correct the tenses when possible, and so on and so forth. So if your Bible reads a little different, we defer to Trent's version of the King James Version, and that helps. And look at Young's literal translations, great help, and interlinears and whatever study tools we can use. But anyway, so this is Daniel 9 and verse 26, and it says, then after the 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing, and the people and the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary, and its end will come with a flood. Even to the end there will be war. Desolations are determined. So here's a place where this mentions in Daniel this term, desolations. I'm not necessarily saying this is exactly what Jesus was referring to, but this is all part of it. So let's look at the next one. Now this one's in Daniel 11 and verse 31. You want to read that one, Trent?
And arms shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate.
Okay. Now my version says, and they will set up the abomination of desolation, or the abomination that makes desolate. Okay, and then there's another one, chapter 12 and verse 11 is what we see here, and let me find. From the time that the regular sacrifice is abolished and the abomination of desolation is set up, there will be 1,290 days. So that's the verse specifically that it comes out of. So you got any thoughts on this as we jump into?
No, let's go ahead.
Okay. Okay. So So here Jesus, going back to Matthew 24, and in verse 15, Jesus said, therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand, then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. You know, there's a popular argument that a lot of people try to use when it comes to this. And you know what they do? They say, this is must be referring to a man named Antiochus Epiphanes. What do you think about that? Does anything strike you funny about that argument? I mean, just right off the bat.
Yeah, because Christ is speaking of a future event, not of a past event.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's real hard to see, isn't it? No, that it's right there. Of us, and all we have to do is look at it. He said, when you, now wait a minute, who is the you that he was talking to? Well, if you were going to just take us, if you had never studied this before, this is the first time you ever read verse 15. Who would you think the you is when it says in verse 15, therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation?
If I didn't understand hermeneutics, is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
I would think it'd be talking to me.
Okay.
But if now I understand hermeneutics, I know it was talking to, referring back to verse 3.
So the temptation is to think, oh, hey, this is talking to me. Well, he's got it right. It was talking to the people in the first century. This is what we call audience relevance. This was relevant to the people that it was written to and that he was speaking to. All of this was written in the first century, not in the 21st century. Okay, so he says, when you see the abomination of desolation standing in the holy place. Well, what is the holy place anyway? What's the holy place?
Well, it's the temple, the holy of holies. It's where the priest would go in once a year and offer a sacrifice.
Yep, it was a copy of heaven. Matter of fact, we can look at this in Hebrews chapter 9, verse 23 says, therefore it was necessary for the copies of the things in the heavens to be cleansed with these, but the heavenly things themselves with better sacrifices than these. For Christ did not enter a holy place, which we were just talking about, made with hands, a mere copy of the true one, but into heaven itself. See how the holy place is a copy of heaven? Then he says,
why the temple was called heaven.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Now to appear in the presence of God for us. Now here's something interesting, and there are a lot of people are going to say, oh no, don't you refer to history. Well, it's okay to refer to history if you want to prove your point. Well, I'm going to refer to history to prove a historical fact. Josephus wrote about this. If you go to the Antiquities of the Jews, book 3, section 7, paragraph 7, so 377 in Josephus being a priest actually describes this court and all these things here. And he describes it, and he says, just point blank, this was heaven on earth. It was a depiction of heaven on earth. So, boy, that starts making all kinds of sense when you start listening to the Jews in the first century speak, not to 21st century Americans try to interpret something. We got to listen to them and see it the way that they saw it. That's the only way we're ever going to understand it. Audience relevance.
Okay, but here's the thing in Matthew 24:15.
Okay.
He tells me to go back to Daniel to understand what the abomination of desolation is. Does he go on to say when it's going to happen? Well, yeah, he goes on down and says this generation.
That's exactly right.
But he's even more specific if you turn to Luke 21.
Oh, I love this. Yes, mark this in your Bibles. Put this near, at least right
in the margins, right beside this, verse 15.
Yeah, right near verse 15 of Matthew 24. Write down Luke's verse. I'll let you go ahead.
Yeah, this is basic. This is the same thing. This is Luke's account of it. In Luke 21:20, Christ is very specific about when this abomination is drawing nigh or is going to happen. It says, verse 20, and when ye shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh, or near, or at hand. And at hand means at reach, which is within arm's reach, within hand's reach. And when ye shall, he's talking to the disciples, when you see these armies, and he's talking specifically about the nations of armies that were gathered, that were conquered by Rome, and now had become part of Rome's armies. And they surrounded Jerusalem. So he's even more specific within that generation of that 40 years. he tells that when you see these armies, the Roman armies coming, you need to get out.
Yeah. Yeah. So no Roman armies today, by the way. So for our premillennial friends and postmillennial friends, and honestly, our amillennial friends believe this, even though they don't know that they believe it. See what I mean?
I think the amillennial they're more confused than all three of them.
Yeah, the amillennial crowd, no question
They're
about it.
more confused
No
than,
question.
than the other two.
Yeah, because they pull from everything. I call it the hybrid theology.
Exactly.
Because they just pull from here and there, and they're, folks, let me point something out. People in the Church of Christ, traditional Church of Christ today, are, ready for this? Confused. They're very confused. And something else, more than that, although they won't admit it, they are partial preterists. Yes, it's absolutely true. We were converted from premillennialism about 70, 80 years ago, something like that, as a group, generally speaking, to a partial preterist view. And then we went back to some of our premillennial views and brought them back over with us because it was just too tempting to leave that stuff alone and be just first century Christians, which is what we're talking about here. So in Luke 21:20, did you catch the power of that? He said, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then recognize that her desolation is near. So now, when did that happen? When we go back over here to Matthew's account in the Olivet Discourse. Remember, we said we're going to look at Luke 21, Mark 13, and Matthew 24 primarily. But also, there's another Olivet Discourse in the Scriptures. Do you know where that one's found?
It's the book of Revelation.
Yeah, it's the book of Revelation, because John didn't include that in his gospel. Why is that? Well, because he had already written about it in Revelation. So his is the expanded version. Matter of fact, if you study through Revelation, you see, 7 times he talks about the exact same events unfolding and gives detail and so forth about these things. So he really went into detail about his version of the Olivet Discourse. Okay, so when we go back over to Matthew 24, and then we consider Daniel, what's this time frame? When did Jesus say these things are going to take place? Well, our brotherhood believes that these things were going to take place. Now, this is a relatively new assertion, believe it or not. And this is part of the partial preterist view, that up to verse 34, 35, they're not real sure where they're going to cut this off, but definitely by the time you get to 36, this is what they say, which is erroneous, that it switches to the end of the world. But so up to that point, they say, well, yes, this is the destruction of Jerusalem.
You didn't used to teach that.
I know. I remember sitting in Bible studies in the Church of Christ when I was just a little kid, and they were teaching this is the end of the world, right up through verse 34. They did not make any transition. So we see our brotherhood changing because they're starting to see the truth, and I'm thankful for that. Okay.
The issue is that people have too much pride and they can't admit that they're wrong.
Yeah, I know. I was there. I was there for too long.
Especially if you're in a pulpit making $60,000, $80,000, $100,000 a year, and you've got full control of you got Jim Jones control of your congregation.
Yeah, I'm not even going to go there. Okay, so the abomination of desolation. Let's go back over here and talk about this specifically in Daniel, about the time that this abomination of desolation would occur. Now, it's my contention that this abomination that's spoken of here is essentially the same thing. Okay, so let's look at this again. We're going to focus here on chapter 11 and also in chapter 12. So chapter 11 and verse 31, remember what Daniel said. He said, they will set up the abomination of desolation. At what time? Well, I believe that in Daniel, the 11th chapter, this is just how I would describe Daniel chapter 11. Essentially, we do have Antiochus Epiphanes here. So here's the way this works. From the time the Babylonians came in and they took Jerusalem, destroyed the temple, took captive their people. So 580, something like that, maybe somewhere in that time frame. Okay, so 586, whatever it might be. So this prophecy starts then. 4 kingdoms are described as coming and going. The first kingdom being that of Babylon. So, and that kingdom fell during the time of Daniel. He was alive to see that. Well, we know that the second kingdom that came around, remember what that one was, Trent?
Oh, the first one was Babylonian, second one was Persia.
Yeah. Okay, so the Medes and the Persians. And remember with Cyrus and all of that, and that took place. So the next kingdom after that is the Greek kingdom. And then after that comes the Roman period. Okay, so we're going to watch history unfold in prophecy before it ever takes place in virtual minute detail. So we know that part of Daniel 11 is talking about Antiochus Epiphanes, and this is where this gets difficult. The thing that is difficult is getting over our preconceived notions. Antiochus was absolutely a historical figure. Can't deny that. What happened during the Maccabean revolt, we can't deny that. And this is how I see this. And of course, you know, years of study more might sharpen this up. I'm sure it will even more. But so we can't deny that. And we can't deny that the events, we're not going to spend the time to go all through this because we really want to focus on the Olivet Discourse. But we're watching history unfold through each one of these kingdoms. So what takes place is the simple fact that history is unfolding exactly the way it was prophesied. Antiochus was a part of that history. But there was another kingdom after that. This all did not end with his kingdom, with that time period, with the Maccabean revolt and so forth.
Daniel ends with
Rome.
Rome coming to destroy Jerusalem.
Yeah. That's how this prophecy ends, and that's what we see. So I believe that when you look at verse 33, here in verse 33 of Daniel 11, it says, "Those who have insight among the people will give understanding to the many, yet they will fall by the sword and by flame, by captivity, by plunder, for days." My version adds many. But the idea here is that this is something that is ongoing. So it's, guess what? Here it's starting, and this is going to last for a long time.
It's going to last for many days as opposed to quickly or shortly.
Yep, exactly right. Now notice here, this gets interesting too, verse 34. When they fall, they will be granted a little help, and many will join with them in hypocrisy. Some of those who have insight will fall in order to refine, purge, and make them pure. Now listen to this. Until the end time, not end of time, the time of the end. The end time.
King James says time of the end.
It's time of the end is proper.
Because it's yet for a time appointed.
That's right. Mine says, because it is still to come at the appointed time. So what's the appointed time? Here's the question that Jesus was begging the reader to understand there in Matthew chapter 24 and verse 15. What is the appointed time? Verse 36 says, and here's where history departs from AE 4, Antiochus Epiphanes 4, and we start watching another king come to fruition through these prophecies. Then the king will do as he pleases and will exalt and magnify himself above every god and will speak monstrous things against the God of gods, and he will prosper until the indignation is finished, for that which is decreed will be done. Well, what indignation is finished? This can't be Antiochus Epiphanes. All of the scholarly men who look at this and give this serious reading know that there's a real problem here. This does not fit. When you read the rest of the chapter, this does not fit AE4. It does not fit him. It can't. It's impossible. But it does fit very handily a Roman king, Herod. The Herod's ruled, as a matter of fact. Remember when Jesus was born, who was king? It was Herod. What did he do? He made a decree to kill all of the children, the male children of the Jews, 2 years and younger. Not a very good guy.
It parallels the birth of Moses, by the way.
Oh, yeah, exactly. So when we see that this fourth kingdom now has come, this could not be during the time of Antiochus Epiphanes. Now let's look at Daniel chapter 12 and verse 1. Now it says, now at that time, okay, at what time? This last kingdom.
Time of the end.
Yeah. Now, do you remember, was it chapter 2, Daniel 2, and Daniel 7 says, at that time the kingdom will be set up and it'll never be destroyed?
Right.
What time was that? Not during the time of Antiochus Epiphanes. It was to be during the Roman rule. So this has to be a Roman period, not necessarily a Roman king, but a Roman period king. So, and we know that Herod fits the bill fantastically, actually. And it answers a lot of questions. So at that time, during this Roman period, and that only makes sense, it's just from Daniel, those 4 kingdoms, this is the last one. At that time, Michael, the great prince who stands guard over the sons of your people, will arise, and there will be a time of distress, such as never occurred since there was a nation until that time. And at that time, well, let's stop right there. So he talks about this time, at that time, a time of distress will occur, such as never occurred. Okay, so do you have a lot of details about what happened with Antiochus in 170 or whatever exact date that was? I'm not exactly sure. Essentially, in 3 days, they slaughtered 40,000 Jews. They were wading through blood in the streets of Jerusalem. That's pretty bad, but it doesn't hold a candle. And it's bad, and I'm not trying to make light of this, but it doesn't hold a candle to the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 during the time of the Roman Empire, not the time of the Greeks, during the time of the Romans. Okay, so what we see in 70, 1.2 million Jews, according to Josephus, in Jerusalem were murdered, mostly by their own countrymen and some by the Romans. Then all of the people that were killed outside of Jerusalem, even more, and imprisoned, even more.
Also through the cities of Israel throughout
right.
the world. They even went down and conquered them.
Yeah.
You know, there's a point here where you read, what was it that you read? Something about it should be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what nation is that? It's talking about the nation of Israel.
Oh, Israel, yeah.
Okay. So it's actually repeated. Christ says, go back to Daniel and read. Then he goes and he quotes from Daniel in verse 21 in Matthew 24. Yeah. He says, for then shall be great tribulation such as was not since the beginning of the world, which is the beginning of the nation of Israel, to this time, no, nor ever shall be. So are there multiple nor there never shall be's? Well, according to the futurists, there's many of them.
Yeah, but we've had it wrong all these years. We've just had it wrong.
Well, the sad thing is that the Jews in the first century, because they did not understand their history, they didn't go back and study the Old Testament or the First Testament, the law, and they were completely ignorant of it. So when Christ came, they didn't recognize who he was, even though he had been prophesied, and they'd seen all the times that they'd gone into captivity and they were almost destroyed to oblivion, but God resurrected and pulled them out of that. So we today we're the same way. We're so biblically ignorant that I'm almost I don't know, maybe I'm a pessimist, but almost to the point that Christ could come and stand and people would still deny it. He'd come and say, no, you guys are wrong. I've already come back, and people would deny it still.
Yeah.
That's not what my preacher says.
Yeah, it's well, I don't even know.
It's a lack of, I don't know. This stuff just jumps out at me because I've studied it.
Well, when you give it an honest reading and you see it from their perspective, from a Jewish perspective and a first century perspective, and you stop thinking like an American and interpreting it like a 21st century English-speaking American with our ideas and so forth, and our idioms and our sayings, then this really does make a lot more sense. Okay, so at that time, we've determined was not during the time of Antiochus, not at 170-ish before Christ, BC. It was during this Roman period, not necessarily by a Roman king, but this Roman period, which turned out to be Herod. So he says at that time, what's going to happen? This time of distress such as never occurred, which Trent handily pointed out there in verse 21 of Matthew 24. He's referring to this. But Jesus, if you notice there in Matthew 24, he adds, and never will again. Now, why is that? Has there been atrocities since then that were just as bad? How many Jews did Hitler kill? Well, the point of this is, during this Jewish nation, this Jewish world, this Jewish earth, this Jewish heaven that we've already pointed out, when that all came to an end, it's never going to happen again because that Jewish nation is gone. It's eliminated. Okay, so let's think about this. So he says, at that time of distress, such as never occurred, this is Daniel 12, verse 1 and 2. A nation, since there was a nation up till that time, at that time, your people, Trent, who is the your people there? He's talking to Daniel.
Yeah, well, who is Daniel's people?
They were Jews.
They're Jews.
Yeah, they're children of Israel, Judah and Israel. Okay, so he says, at that time, your people, everyone who is found written in the book. Well, doesn't that sound like familiar language to you? Written in the book? Yeah. Could this be any particular book, maybe? I'm thinking we're talking about this book where people's names are written in it for life, or in this case, you're going to see there were some who weren't written in there, and they received death. Now, let's keep reading. At this time, what time? This is the time when the Roman king, that Roman time period, was happening. At that time, your people, the Jews, he says, everyone who is found written in the book will be rescued. And then verse 2 of Daniel 12, many of those who sleep in the dust of the ground will awake, these to everlasting life, but others to disgrace and everlasting contempt. My friends, this is the only place in the entire Old Testament, that's the entire Old Covenant, the only verse that talks about, at the same time, the judgment of the just and the unjust. Do you see that there? Yeah. It talks about, listen to this, the resurrection of these people, those who sleep in the dust of the ground, some to everlasting life and some to everlasting disgrace. This is the judgment of the just and the unjust. Now, this is the same great white judgment throne scene that we see in the book of Revelation. So let's go over here and look at this. Okay, so we're going to Revelation, what is this? Revelation 20, verse 11. Okay, so now listen to this. Then I saw a great white throne, and him who sat upon it, from whose presence earth and heaven fled away, no place was found from them. I'm going to suggest to you from Deuteronomy 29 and 32, Deuteronomy 31 and 32, both chapters. And plenty other places we could talk about. Isaiah 65, Isaiah 55, several other places, Deuteronomy 4, all talk about heaven and earth being this old covenant. The Old Testament, this old law. Okay? This was their world. It was their earth. It was everything to them. It was what sustained them. It's where they lived. Okay? It was their heaven and earth. So he says, that heaven and earth fled away and no place was found for them. We know that the old law was coming to an end. Hebrews 9 and wait, I just went blank on this.
8:13.
8:13. Yeah, Hebrews 8:13 teaches that this old law was growing old and ready to pass away. So it hadn't passed away yet. Why is that? Well, remember we read in Hebrews 9 about this embodiment of heaven on earth. It was still there. That was the temple. And as long as that temple was to stand, then guess what's going to take place? They're going to keep offering sacrifices. They're going to keep cleansing the temple. They're going to keep fighting over it. All this stuff is going to keep happening. So the scriptures say that that was going to come to an end. Now, but let's keep reading in Revelation 20, verse 12. And I saw the dead, the great and the small, standing before the throne, and books were opened. And another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged from the things which were written in it, in the books, according to their deeds. So the dead were judged, the just according to their deeds, the unjust according to their deeds, and the books were opened. It's awful ironic, isn't it? But yet, our futurist brethren want to tell us that the last 3 chapters of Revelation are things that are yet to occur in the future. Now, how can that be?
Well, they just have it wrong because they don't understand the First Testament. They don't understand God's dealing with His covenant people. I don't even know if they understand that we're in a covenant relationship with God now. I don't think they even understand that.
Yeah. We are. Yeah, there is a covenant. God always has a covenant with His people, and there is a covenant that exists today.
Well, what about the people who aren't in the covenant? Well, they're judged already.
Yeah, they're dead and judged.
Well, here it goes in there, and so where was this back here in verse 12, Revelation 20:12. Said they were judged out of those things which were written in the books according to the works. So you mean there's a logbook, in essence, of our life on earth and the things that we do? Is that what this is saying?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a book being kept on us. So when we judge, or when we die, as depicted, I said earlier, it's appointed unto man once to die, after this the judgment. We're judged out of that book that's been being kept about our lives, minute by minute, second by second. So I don't know. I just don't know how to explain it more easily for people to understand.
Let me give a stab at it. Here's what I think judgment is. And I'll make this as quick as possible. Judgment occurs right now while you're alive.
Mm-hmm.
No, while you're dead. No, wait a minute, while you're alive. Wait a minute, it occurs while you're alive yet dead. Get that? So you are judged. Is appointed unto man once to die. Now, when do you die? When is your Adamic death? The same death that Adam underwent. Is that when you physically, your heart stops beating, you stop respiring, and there's no more? No. I heard you. Physical death has nothing to do with your judgment. Well, it does, but not for this purpose that we're talking about here. Physical death is not what we're talking about. Spiritual death is when you are judged. All right? Judgment occurs when you become accountable for your sins. We often call it the age of accountability. Somewhere in those early teen years, something like that, we become aware. Just like Romans 1 and Romans chapter 1 and chapter 2 teach that this knowledge is within us when we become mature or this age of accountability, I guess you might say. Then when that happens, we die. We're judged. We're lost. We're judged. We're not saved. We're not in that safe condition anymore.
We're not in covenant with God.
That's right. Hebrews 9:27. After death, spiritual death, just like Adam, you're judged, just like Adam, just like Eve.
The only thing that physical death does, it is the time that you learn your sentence.
Yeah.
That is the time, that sentence of whether or not you are in covenant with God eternally, or you're not in covenant.
I just thought of something. If you're a futurist and you believe in the Hadean realm that still exists, you're judged how many times?
2 or 3 times.
At least 2 times.
Yeah.
3 if you count the way we were talking about it. Because you have to go and wait in the Hadean realm. Now here's a good question. If you die and you believe in the Hadean realm, okay, Luke 16, that it still applies to us today. So when you die and you go to the comfort of Abraham, you're in the bosom of Abraham, is that an indicator of your eternal abode?
I would say yes.
Oh, yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. It absolutely is.
You know your sentence before you're judged.
That's right. So you were judged when you went to the Hadean realm. Just like the rich man was when he lifted up his eyes, being where? In torment. And he couldn't leave this place. Okay. But so on Judgment Day, what happens to him? Or anybody? Yeah. So it does not follow the biblical narrative. However, if you understand that has been taken out of the way and you are judged when you die as Adam died and was judged and was found wanting, then it begins to make sense. Okay.
This is why why futurists, if you really delve deep into why they want to hold on to this and not the truth, they want to hold on to a false narrative, is because their hope is that they're going to pass this death, that Christ is going to come back. They're not going to face death. They're just going to be changed in a twinkling of an eye, and they're not going to face judgment or death. Christ is going to come back and save them. That's why people hold on to it. It's a false narrative.
Yeah.
It's a false hope that the church has ingrained in people. So all these people before us who have had this hope and believe this lie have died without their hope being fulfilled. And so does God leave you hopeless?
In that scenario?
In that scenario, he does.
Yeah, that's sad.
See, so it's the whole thing about, I don't want to face death as a human being, so therefore Christ has to come back and pull me out of here so I don't have to face death. I don't have to face the rigors of life, the disappointments, and I don't have to face watching my family die. And I'm safe from all this. That's why they hang on. It's an emotional thing, and it's so difficult to get people to think beyond emotional.
Imagine the power that the Lord's church would have if they came to this understanding that they can go out and they tell people, you have been judged. You are dead now, and actually understand what that means.
Yeah.
We'd start converting with more people because that is the truth. Okay, so let's see if we can make a little more sense about Daniel 12 and what Jesus had to go back and read. Because remember, he quoted it at least twice in the 24th chapter of Matthew. Okay, so we were there in verse 2, and we had talked about those who are asleep in the dust of the ground will awake. That's resurrection. That's judgment. Now notice this. He says, those who have insight will shine brightly. This is verse 3. Like the brightness of the expanse of heaven, and those who lead the many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. So, wait a minute. If this was actual judgment, the end of the world, destruction, all of this flames and fire that people traditionally associate with the end of the world, which the Bible never speaks of, then how could it be that there are people who are left that are what? Leading others, leading the many to righteousness. Never thought about that one, did you? Neither did I, until I opened my eyes and looked at it, and right there it was in front of me. So there are people still alive after the supposed calamity that takes place, and the world's coming to an end, and judgment's taking place. There's people still converting others. Okay, verse 4, but as for you, Daniel, conceal the words and seal up the book until the time of the end. If your Bible, like mine, says the end of time, it's 100% wrong. It should not be there. Many accurate translations, and I generally consider the New American Standard Bible to be pretty good, but here they just simply dropped the ball. Even the King James got it right, didn't they? The time of the end.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay. Then he says, many will go back and forth, and knowledge will increase. Well, what knowledge is going to increase? The gospel. Read 1 Peter chapter 1, 10 through 12. These are the things that angels long to look into, and these prophets wanted to know, and they wouldn't know, but it was for that generation. I promise you it says that. Just go over there and read it. 1 Peter 1, I think it's 10 through 12. Verse 5 of Daniel 12. Then I, Daniel, looked, and behold, two others were standing, one on this bank of the river, and the other on that bank of the river. And one said to the man dressed in linen, who was above the waters of the river, how long will it be until the end of these wonders? Well, that's the question we've been asking and answering. When are these events going to take place? How long it will be till the end of these wonders? Now, what wonders? All of these prophecies through the book of Daniel that Daniel prophesied in his lifetime. These are all the things he's talking about. When are all of these things going to come to an end? And some people interpret Daniel's prophecies to be at the end of time, even though it never, ever, 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 ever says that in Daniel. I mean, I've got that. Did I miss something?
No, you're right.
Okay, all right. Okay, so Trent, what do you make of this? Verse 7. You want to read that?
And I heard the man clothed in linen, which was upon the waters of the river, when he held up his right hand and his left hand unto heaven, and swear by him that lives forever, that it shall be for a time, times, and half time, and when he shall have accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people, all these things shall be finished.
Anything strike you funny about that? Well, I got a blue million things going through my head about it. One thing, here's one question I got.
Mm-hmm.
Look, can you play devil's advocate for a minute?
Sure. Yeah.
You ever had any experience with that?
No.
Okay. Okay. So
not at all.
So the question is asked: how long will it be to the end of these wonders? The end of these things.
Yeah, I didn't say the end of time.
Okay. So how long is it going to be? Now, what did he say here?
Time, times, and half time. So now we have to identify what a time is, what a times is, and what a half time is.
Just for the sake of brevity, understand that this adds up to 42. Now, it's awful ironic that this is also often used to indicate a year, 12 months, 12, 12, 12, So time would be 12 months. Times would be 2 years, would be 24 months. And then another 6 months, and that adds up to 42 months. Ironically, this is pretty much what happened with the destruction of Jerusalem. The war began in 66, and it ended in 70.
Began in the spring and ended in the fall. Now, we see this in Revelation 11, where it identifies with these times. Revelation 11:1 says, "And there was given me a reed like unto a rod, and the angel stood, saying, Arise and measure the temple of God, and the altar and them that worship therein. But the court, which is without the temple, leave out, and measure it not, for it is given unto the Gentiles, and the holy city shall they tread underfoot 42 months." That's talking about the Roman armies. When you see the armies encompass Jerusalem, know that this desolation is near.
Perfect. Fits perfect.
42 months.
So when are these things going to take place? When is this going to come about? When this 42 months. That's awful ironic to ignore that. History proves it. Josephus called it out. The scriptures teach us. Daniel and Revelation teach us.
And I've heard all the really, I mean, to this point now, it's getting ridiculous. The arguments you hear about Revelation 11:1 and 2, people are saying that this is a modern day church. That is so, I mean, I hate to use terms like that, but it's beyond ridiculous anymore. When people try to say that is talking about modern church and the Gentiles today, there are only Christians and there's nobody else. The people who are around here, they're non-Christians. There's Christians and non-Christians, no Gentiles.
Yep, that's exactly right. And there's neither Jew nor Greek, bond nor free, so on.
Right. Oh, yeah, good point.
It makes sense, doesn't it? Yeah.
Either a Christian or you're not.
Yeah. Right. You're lost or you're saved. That's your condition, the spiritual. Okay, so back here to Daniel. Let's see if we can make sense of this before we run out of time. So he asked the question, when are all these things going to come to an end? You just answered it. The scriptures just answered this, my friends. This teaches us.
It's a hermeneutic.
That's right. And this is called letting the scriptures interpret the scriptures.
The analogy of faith.
Yep.
That's where we get our faith. Is that the Bible defines the Bible.
Yeah. So the scriptures are teaching us what all of these things mean. So we don't have to have history to understand these things. Just some Bible study. And if history corroborates the Bible, great. But if it doesn't, then history is wrong and the scriptures are correct. That is called inspiration of the scripture. Okay, so he says that they're going to finish shattering the power of the holy people. And when that happens, all of these things are going to take place. This will be the end. It will be completed. Now, when was the power of the holy people totally shattered? They were scattered. They were murdered. They were killed. They were just about wiped off the face of the planet. There's only one point in time. That's in the 70s. It wasn't in the 40s with Hitler. Hasn't.
Look, I don't mean to demean anyone who calls himself a Jew. You can call yourself whatever you want. The truth in this is that I don't think that there is a Jew alive today who can trace his lineage back to the first century. And I don't say this out of being mean-hearted or mean-spirited. I say this out of just truth. Because all of the records, the Jews were very good about keeping their birth records. So they keep the lines pure up to the end of their nation. They kept the lines pure, their lineage pure. So they kept these records meticulously, but they were all destroyed in 70 AD. So a Jew can claim to be a Jew today, but is he really a Jew from the first century or bloodline of a Jew? I don't think anybody can prove that.
We don't have the Levitical lineage for the priesthood.
Right. Well, that's how Hitler hid the fact that his grandfather was Jewish. Because when he went into Austria.
That's a good point.
And when he went into Austria,
Hitler wasn't in Jerusalem, Samantha says. So that makes an excellent point. Yeah. Okay. let's see if we can do a little more here. What do you think?
We
So,
have 5 minutes.
verse 8.
Maybe I ought to stay a little bit longer.
Maybe a minute or two if we can, if we can get it that close. So then he says, as for me, I heard, but could not understand. So I said, my Lord, what will be the outcome of these events? So Daniel's asking, what's the outcome of these things? And he said, go your way, Daniel, for these words are concealed and sealed up until the end time, not the end of time, end time. The time of the end is what it should be. And then he says, many will be purged, purified, and refined, but the wicked will act wickedly, and none of the wicked will understand. But those who have insight will understand. From the time that the regular sacrifice is abolished and the abomination of desolation is set up, there will be 1,290 days. There's that 42 again. All right?
42 months.
42 months. How blessed is he who keeps waiting and attains to the 1,335 days. Okay. I'm just going to give you my opinion on this 1,290 and 1,335. We know that this 42 months was essentially this time period when the destruction of Jerusalem was going to take place. And the Lord said he would come at that time. Well, something that we have to keep in mind is that we don't know when that exact time is. And Jesus tells us that when we get back over to Matthew 24 next week, we might get this far, I don't know. But you can look there in Matthew 24. Jesus even said, of that specific day and hour, no one knows. So here's my thought on the 1,335. Do we know at what point between the 1,290 and 1,335 that Jesus is specifically going to come? So I'm thinking that this is a general reference to that. This day and hour that no man knows specifically other than the Father. And I think when Jesus was inspiring John for Revelation, I think he knew it then too. All you got to do is read verse 1. This is the information that God gave Christ to give his bondservant Jesus to tell us. Or well, not us, but them. Humanity. Okay, so that's my take on that. But notice what he says in verse 13. He says, as for you, go your way to the end, then you will enter into rest. So he's going to die. He's going to go to Sheol, the Hadean realm, and then he is going to rise again. Well, what's this rise again? Did I already talk about that?
Yeah, verse 2.
Verse 2. He talked about this resurrection. At the time of the end, go your way, you're going to die. You're going to go to Sheol. You're going to wait there until the time of the end. You're going to rise again for your allotted portion at what? The end of the age. What age? The age of the Mosaic law, that old covenant system. Now I know we've just dumped heaps and heaps of information here, and there's a lot to sort through and try to figure out. But essentially what we're seeing here is this timeline being fulfilled of Daniel's prophecies. And that's what Jesus wanted us to understand, because that is exactly what he's doing, unless I'm wrong about this, but that's exactly what he's doing in the Olivet Discourse. He's saying, just as Daniel laid this out, I'm laying this out too. He even uses Daniel and references that, but he lays it out. Now, back in Matthew 24, let's notice here, we're going to skip around just a little bit, but Trent, will you read the particular passage that says when Jesus will come?
I can't find it.
Well, what about when it's close, like verse 34?
Well, it gives an indication about what period.
There you
time.
go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled.
That's right. This generation. Well, what generation? Not this one. And it certainly does not make sense to say, well, the generation that it happens to, it's going to happen quickly. And it could be
that generation.
Could be 20,000 generations from now. Really? Oh, that hurts my head. I need some Tylenol, sinus or migraine or something for that.
But
that doesn't make sense.
Here's a plea.
That's a cop-out.
Here's a plea that I want to make. We've got a pretty good number who watch this program weekly, and I want to ask you to think about this. Why are you watching, and why are you looking? Are you yearning for information? Are you yearning for the truth? Or are you just watching for the spectacle of it because you know that we're embattled with another congregation over this? Is that what you're looking at? Or are you looking because you're truly looking for the truth Now, we've given you so much information that by now you should start to be leaning towards the truth. But something prevents you, or someone prevents you from coming and hearing us live and speaking to us and asking questions to where we can study this together. I want to know what it is that holds you back from taking that step forward to the truth. What are you waiting on? Are you waiting for some big-minded minister to come by and say, well, yeah, they're right? Or are you doing it because your family doesn't believe it? What is withholding you from the truth? Why are you not coming to try to understand this and study this with us? So my plea to you is, put aside those things that hinder you and come and let's discuss this. We're not going to tie your hands behind your back. We're not going to badger you like some do on the other side. We're not going to put you to shame publicly. We're not. We won't even name your name to anything. We won't even bring up a conversation that we've had with you. The thing is, let's get to the truth. Quit sitting back, because there is going to be a time when you can't do this. Either through death or some physical issues comes up and you can't. Then it's too late. Then why wait? Is it because of your family? Are they pressuring you? They're pressuring you because they're scared that they may believe something that wasn't true. Put aside those things and come and study with us.
Well, one of the things, and I want to add to this, and then we'll wrap this up. One of the things that you have to understand, this isn't preterism. This isn't AD 70. This isn't realized eschatology or covenant eschatology. I mean, those terms have their place, I suppose. What this is first century Christianity. This is what you read that they were teaching and that they were believing in the first century when these books were written. When James wrote in chapter 5, verses 7 and 9, he mentions 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 times there. He says, these things are pertaining to you. The Lord is on his way. He's coming. He's at the door. The judgment's getting ready to take place. And he's told them what? You be ready for these things. Now, those are all the same language that we see in Revelation chapter 22. It's all getting ready to happen. It's coming soon. It's at hand, and all these other statements. This is first century Christianity. Yeah, it's not AD 70. It's not preterism.
No, they put a name on it so they can demonize it.
Yeah. So just scare people. Okay, looks like we might have actually done that justice, even with our rant early on. Yeah. So it looks like we'll pick up next week, same time, same place, at verse 16 in Matthew chapter 24, after Jesus has told us to go back and read Daniel. So we looked at where these abominations were here in Daniel. So next week we'll pick up there and start looking at the rest of the things that he was saying were shortly to come to pass in that generation. So come be with us, Westside Church of Christ, Indianapolis, Indiana, 2675 Kentucky Avenue. We'd love to have you. Our service times, 9:30 for Bible study Sunday morning and 10:30 for our worship service, thereabouts, and 5 o'clock again in the evening. And of course, we'd love to have you on Wednesday night at 7 o'clock. And any closing comments?
Nope, other than that Christ told Peter and he told John he was going to come back in the lifetime of John. Read John. Read the book. Yeah. Read the Gospel of John. Yeah,
chapter 20 is pretty specific about it.
Yeah.
Okay, good thoughts. All right, look forward to seeing you next week. Tell everybody to look us up. Ask for a friend request on Facebook. We're also on YouTube. Getting ready to change that name on YouTube, so be looking for that. But for now, it's at AD 70 for everybody. And I'll just leave you with this, unless you have something else to say. Study.
Good night and good studies.
Yeah. Study to show yourself approved unto God. Thank you very much.
Did anybody on there say anything about not transmitting?